you folks ready to go?
Yeah, hi. So definitely, there's no actual presentation prepared on this. Apologize. You're just going to have to listen and let your eyes wander, which is perhaps a blessing in disguise. But yeah, so thank you everyone for giving the National Inuit Youth Council the opportunity to participate in this roundtable. Um, it's obviously quite important that as we discuss the welfare of children across the nation, that we um, pay heed to the circumstances um, that Inuit children and youth are subjected through just through living in their regions. For those who aren't aware, of course, there are so many socioeconomic disadvantages that come hand in hand with growing up in indigenous communities. Um, there's a lot of really great things, of course, big sense of community, strong connections to the culture, to family, to the land yeah, as well, and having the ability to ground oneself through those things in a way that for those who are living in more urbanized settings would perhaps never experience in the same way. But of course, as well, there are so many challenges that when it comes to Inuit children and youth around the this making sure that there's access to um, for services, medical, dental, psychological, educational, um, that we take for granted in more southern environments and more urbanized settings. Um, so so kind of honing in on the specific context that at least I understood what this particular forum is intended to be. Um, so from preamble, so the youth council, it's in National Youth Council is a volunteer thing. So I volunteer, as president of the National Youth Council. I have a full-time job as well, um, and it makes it challenging to be abundantly prepared for these kinds of events. But nonetheless, there are still very important points that I like to touch on. As it relates to the guiding questions that were provided. For example, does Canada need a children's strategy? Well, of course. I mean, there it's taken for granted that, for example, the educational system as is satisfactory, that it ticks a lot of the boxes, that all the systems mesh cohesively and coherently. Um, but I know like firsthand experience as a foster parent actually that this is not the case. It's there's a number of I guess double standards that exist for Inuit children and youth as individuals as part of nuclear or at least familial units um, when juxtaposed with Inuit children in care of either the provincial or territorial governments. For example, it's written into at least the Child Youth Care and Protection Act here in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador um, about, oh, sorry, actually, I think it's the Education Act, something like that, about the attendance of children with to school and how it's like written in the act that child youth services, child welfare, whatever they're called, wherever you're from, they will intervene and follow up and make sure that that kid goes to school because otherwise the assumption is that you're failing as a parent effectively and not providing for the child as it relates to education. But there is a double standard here because I know of like an exact, very close to me case where a child in care is not going to school. They are, but it's for like maybe an hour, hour and a half a day, and as a result, the longer that they go to school for this amount of time, they're not even given the opportunity, I think, to actually take school full time. There's a growing educational gap that that's being created by the intervention of child services, and it's so there's um, uh, an inherent need to analyze more closely and more circumspectly how all these systems interweave to best um, bolster, the best interest of children. Best interest, of course, being the big word that's used in a lot of legislative guidance and law. So so based upon that, the perspective of myself on behalf of National Youth Council um, is that any such strategy that respects children and youth on a national level should be sure to include um, a holistic approach that ensures that these kind of fringe cases, for when they do occur, because they will, anytime that things are developed relatively in silos, there will be cracks in the system where people might not fall under exactly one jurisdiction or the other, but nevertheless could really use support. And uh, as a result, it's clear to me, at least, that any such strategy should you know ensure that it prioritizes the areas where there are no overlap. At least it has that built into it, where it helps to handle these fringe cases that will crop up across the nation, not even for Indigenous kids, for every Canadian, could be subject to a situation where it just so happens that they don't fall under any particular one umbrella, and therefore are not getting the proper supports. So when it comes to what a strategy should what should be aimed to do with the strategy, um, I mean, how do you measure progress, right? It comes down to milestones and progress updates, and hitting goals, and having indicators of what success looks like. Um, so from that perspective, depending on how the direction ultimately that the strategy will be developed upon, there will need to be indicators of um, of people, issues identified, for example, like systemic issues that negatively impact children and youth. And particularly my lens, I see it a lot where Inuit children and youth are faced with and a mountainous pile of issues as it relates to any kind of interface um, between government and families for Inuit, just based upon the socioeconomic factors and protective issues that do crop up in many households across Inuit Nunangat, which are the lands that Inuit live upon. Because of things like housing crises, where you have multiple generations, it's very common to have a grandparent, their children, and maybe like a partner or spouse, and then that kids, like the grandkids as well, even great grandparents or great grandkids, conversely, all under one roof, that may only have like a 2-3 bedrooms. You might have just like 10 plus people, easy, living in a house in some really cramped spots where the housing crisis is really exaggerated. There's also, of course, the access to food um, uh, in across Inuit communities as well. It's a big issue for children and youth. There are some really incredible programs that help to curtail the negative impacts um, of food insecurity that many Inuit children and youth are faced with through like school, like breakfast programs at school, sometimes even lunch programs, and subsidies for grocery stores as well. But of course, if the parents or the caregivers, if they don't have the funds to really get groceries, then for example, then it's kind of moot. If there's a subsidy, if it's still inaccessible due to the cost barrier associated with that. Just for some context about employment outcomes within this on like a larger Canadian perspective, as according to the 2021 census, there is roughly, I believe it's around 5% of Inuit have bachelor degrees or higher. So 1 in 20 Inuit who are within the applicable age range to have such degrees, which is substantially diverging from the roughly 30% figure that we see for general Canadians, where 30% of Canadians within the same kind of applicable age range have bachelor degrees or higher. So when there's an educational disparity, it creates income disparity and lack of purchasing power for families with children and youth as well, of course, and therefore we need to be sure to satisfactorily, I would say as well, equitably address such discrepancies that are exacerbated by the remoteness of many of these communities, as well as, of course, the cost barriers associated with even getting in and out of the communities, and therefore also getting food in is also it's extreme. The cost is extreme, and subsidies are helping, but there's still, even with them, it still makes it really hard to afford healthy foods in northern communities. I personally grew up basically on a diet of canned meatballs and gravy and Kraft dinner, and I understand that a lot of my peers who grew up in more southern places where their parents have many degrees and are together as well, like the parents are still together, like they have had much more lavish opportunities for food than I did growing up in North Coast of Labrador, in Inuit communities there, Vriglet and Postville. As it relates to who should be included in such a strategy, there's of course the reality that we need to be respectful of the contemporary demographic makeup of Canadians, and make sure that there's at least a proportionate amount of voices to represent the diversity of children and youth within Canada, because it's it's just so it would be an injustice if we didn't have adequate representation of all the different demographics that make up today's Canada. So for sure, just the Indigenous groups, obviously, as well as other groups that represent the kind of BIPOC portion of Canada, and also is trying to ensure that there's I guess an equitable weighting for everybody's concerns, because a lot of the issues I just described that affect the remote Inuit communities, they're not even applicable to many of the communities across Canada. By analogy, perhaps there's communities that maybe they're on an island, but there's still not quite as remote as, for example, somewhere like Iqaluit, Pond Inlet, these kind of communities in the northern, like extreme north, for sure. So when it comes to accountability, that just comes hand in hand with ensuring that there are outcomes that are well defined, actions well defined by the different groups involved in the creation of the strategy, and then just making sure that these different groups are themselves meeting these targets that are outlined, and that their specific groups, for example, are accountable for. When it comes to whether or not this strategy, how I guess the scope, there is I would say a need for this to at least be observed by both federal representatives as well as provincial and territorial representatives, just so that there is, again, like I mentioned before about how the nature of dealing with bureaucracies is that there are lots of fringe cases that don't fall under any one umbrella because these things are designed in silos, as is the nature of bureaus within a government. So it would need to be more national in the sense that there's a cohesion, at least in principle, between the federal governments, provincial governments, and territorial governments. Yeah, I believe that's all I have to say on
Oh,
that.
wow, Brian. I was about to tell you have 2 minutes left, so that's perfect timing, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I think, Cameron, you're going to be presenting for Regional Multicultural Youth Council, and then don't go anywhere, Brian, because after Cameron's presentation, we'll have our Q&A. But thank you so much it's a great way to kick off our afternoon, so thank you for that presentation. And Cameron, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just want to check my microphone's still okay. I just changed my headphones. Yeah, okay. So thank you for having us. My name is Cameron. I'm 21 years old and I moved to Ottawa recently, but I'm from Thunder Bay. I've been working with the Regional Multicultural Youth Council in Thunder Bay since 2020 as a peer mentor. I've been on the team running the summer programming for the last 3 years, and I've been really fortunate to make a lot of connections with the youth. There are also 2 past presidents of RMYC here, Wendy Wang and Heran Zhao, who can answer questions in the chat if there are any. So I'll introduce our organization a little bit, talk about my personal experience, as well as our strategies for working with youth that we use. The Regional Multicultural Youth Council is a group that has been building connections between youth in Thunder Bay, as well as surrounding areas in Northwestern Ontario and remote northern communities since 1985. Using a youth-to-youth peer mentoring approach, we focus on 3 main goals, which are to keep youth safe, to give youth a voice, and to help youth graduate. In other words, we encourage youth to invest and participate in their own future. A major focus of our group is anti-racism, reconciliation, and multiculturalism, and we also explore themes of gender and sexuality, decolonizing, mental health, and whatever the youth bring to the table. RMYC is youth-led, so the youth organize their weekly and monthly meetings, set the agendas, and fully organize events for other youth, down to which food is served. They're really hands-on in leadership and organizing, deciding as a group which issues are important to them based on what they experience in their personal lives, school, and family backgrounds. We facilitate experiences for youth of different cultures to learn from each other in a safe, judgment-free environment where they can learn how to ask respectful questions and share their own experiences. As well, we work to create a safe space where youth who are traveling from their reserves to attend high school in Thunder Bay can make new friends and be around positive influences. The key element of the RMYC is our youth-to-youth approach to mentoring. A common theme among struggling youth is a lack of connection to community. But by engaging with their peers, their age and slightly older, these youth become friends and begin to open up with each other. The people around them suddenly understand what they're going through as a young person, have common interests, and can serve as positive influences who are available on a day-to-day basis. Throughout my time at RMYC, I've connected with multiple students who literally couldn't talk when they first joined. But within 8 weeks or so of the summer program, they were announcing things on the microphone, organizing events, presenting on topics they're passionate about, comforting other youth, and singing on stage at our talent shows. The reason for these really touching transformations is just that they felt a level of comfort and safety that they hadn't felt in many other places, including at home. At RMYC, they felt unconditional support from their peers, friends, and adult allies. Part of why they feel so comfortable is that we don't shy away from talking about difficult things like race, religion, sexuality, and intergenerational trauma. I remember a really interesting conversation we had one summer between a 13-year-old boy who was Muslim and an older peer who was Indigenous and Two-Spirit and had come from a Christian background. Due to identity and their differing religious backgrounds, the two had questions about each other, like how can someone be Two-Spirit and why do many Muslim women wear hijab? Through the RMYC training of respectful questions, receive respectful answers, they were able to carry on their discussion to completion and answer each other's questions without conflict or misunderstandings. When the youth are organizing events themselves and overcoming the struggles of doing that together, they bond through collaboration in a really unique way that unlocks self-confidence and trust. Often it's the first time they allow themselves to use their voice and speak on issues in their personal lives and communities. Throughout this past summer, while I worked as a peer mentor, I helped the executive team gather information about the main issues that the youth in Thunder Bay are facing right now. They mentioned physical things like a lack of safe, reliable, and affordable transportation, food insecurity, and unsafe living environments. They also mentioned concepts like shame, boredom, mental illness, substance abuse, and trauma. The youth at RMYC believe that to create a better future for themselves and their peers, they need to foster safe spaces, not only for physical safety, but to give youth space to nurture their emotional and mental safety as well. Some steps that we are taking to continue on this path of creating safe spaces are advocating for subsidized transportation for youths and free or discount passes for those registered and participating in after-school programs. And RMYC also runs a transitional housing pilot program, which is a house where youth who are transitioning out of care or transitioning to live on their own for personal reasons can stay with a subsidized rent cost of $400. They are invited to participate in RMYC activities like workshops to work on self-esteem and independence. And RMYC helps them to organize household tasks and begin the journey of independent living. Feedback from the students living there currently confirms the benefits of this initiative as it gives them a safe place to live, close to their schools, and it's quiet for them to study, cook, and sleep in a peaceful environment. We also encourage the youth to run workshops on self-esteem and leadership to minimize shame and insecurity. And they also lead various workshops on topics like hygiene, feminism, cultural days, safe sex, etc. We encourage sharing experiences and educating their peers about social issues. And RMYC runs an after-school program at Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, one of the First Nations high schools in Thunder Bay, and also a DFC student ambassador program, which is especially beneficial for students who are new to the city or who were isolated from community during COVID. The youth run Youth Power, or Girl Power and Band of Brothers, which is where older peers plan activities for children ages 5 to 15 who live in tougher neighborhoods in Thunder Bay. By planning events for children about self-confidence, hygiene, leadership, bullying, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, etc., the youth learn about those things themselves and can exemplify them. RMYC also hosts monthly student working group meetings with representatives from each high school in Thunder Bay to discuss what's happening in school, how the students are feeling, and which actions to focus on, and engages elders for spiritual comfort and professionals for guidance and advice. RMYC youth host ceremonies, sharing circles, workshops, and healing to foster mental wellness. We invest in supervised extracurricular activities, physical exercise, social and cultural events, arts and crafts to promote happiness, so you can grow up having fun, live healthy lifestyles, and unabashedly become themselves. We also do outdoor things like community gardening during the summer, promoting independence, food security, and healthy lifestyles. Other than the heavy things, being involved in RMYC gives struggling youth a chance to make friends and be kids. They plan karaoke nights, zine making workshops, bowling outings, slumber parties, those kind of fun things. Having fun is extremely important to the youth because it offers an alternative to drinking and party culture that most high school students in Thunder Bay are exposed to. Safe spaces are a crucial part of development for teens where they feel understood, but also accepted and loved. So I think, RMYC's main strategy for working with youth is really just about building safe spaces and giving youth that power and assurance to be themselves and to lead themselves into a future that they want. And that's what I have to say for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. So we now will go into a half hour of questions for Cameron and Brian. And so just a reminder, there is translation, so feel free to use it. If you're going to speak, you need your headset with your microphone. If you haven't gone a sound check, we can do that during the break. And please turn your camera on too if you're speaking. That just helps the interpreters a little bit. And if you ever have any questions, you can send them in the chat. Or you can send them to, if you have any questions and you don't have your headset, you can send them in the chat and we'll read them out. But if you have any questions like for us as well, feel free to message us. So I'm going to now open the floor for questions to Cameron and Brian. Feel free to put your hand up or just jump in. Shalik, please go ahead.
Thanks, Josh. And thank you to Cameron and Brian both for your presentations. I just had a quick question for the Regional Youth Council or Youth Multi. Sorry, could you remind me of the full name actually?
It's the Thunder Bay Regional Multicultural Youth Council.
Okay, that's what it is. Okay, well, lovely to hear more about your organization and the work that you do. Specifically, since at the CCR and the Youth Network, we work with young migrants and newcomers. I was curious, and maybe you mentioned this, but I was curious to know if you had any programs tailored specifically for youth newcomers.
We don't have anything specifically for youth newcomers right now. It's more of a collaborative, like we can have cultural days and we have peer mentors in each school who work with art, like who volunteer for RMYC. And then if they notice that there's new students, they'll reach out to them and encourage them to join RMYC. And as well as the student working group meetings each month, they'll invite them to those and they can talk amongst themselves and see what's needed.
Thank you, Cameron.
Any other questions? Cheyenne, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentations.
Do you mind just flipping your, sorry, Cheyenne, do you mind just flipping your microphone down? We can't hear you very well.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Perfect. There we go. Thanks so much.
Technology, I tell you. Yeah, thank you for the presentations, everybody. I just have a question in relation to a national strategy or a federal strategy. And I know that Brian kind of talked about this as well in terms of how geographic discrepancies can definitely impact the way in which young people experience the world compared to their counterparts. And I'm wondering, in terms of a national strategy, what would that look like when it comes to perhaps young people populations that you work with, and within that population from an equity lens, who are the young people who often get left out of these types of conversations, and who should be part of conversations who may be part of stats, however, their voices are silenced or erased? I'm just curious from each of you.
I can try and answer first. I'm not sure if Brian's there, but I think in my experience working with the council, the students who most often talk about not feeling heard is definitely students from remote northern communities or who are traveling for school in Thunder Bay specifically. I think it's a lot of not that they don't have a voice or that they don't have opinions, it's just that they're not sure where to say them or who's listening to them when they say them. Yeah, definitely those students who are traveling or from northern communities where they just don't have people listening to them or have an ear on them, even if they do have things to say.
Brian, did you have anything to add? There you go. Okay. No? Yes? Okay. We'll move on then, and if you want to jump in, Brian, feel free. Any other questions, comments? Would any of the senators have any questions or comments? Être devenir, you have your hand up?
Wait.
Allez-y.
Hey there. Thanks, Cameron, for that presentation. I have a question about what does the decision-making process look like for the youth who are self-organizing? Like, how does that work when planning various events or programs?
Yeah, so we kind of have a structure to it. Like there's a president and vice president, and then they create committees among themselves who will work on different things. Usually the executive team is not huge. I think right now it's about 7 or 8 youths, and then among themselves they'll decide what needs to be done. And we also have the director, Moffat Makuto. He's like the guy who will help with transportation and food and costs and figuring out, once the youth tell him what needs to be done, he'll teach them how to do it, so they're not going blind into any decisions. And then the council has been going since 1985 too, so there's a lot of like alumni of the council who help out, like Wendy and Haran, who are here as well. That'll just teach youth the way to do things, and they've passed on like formats and worksheets and all those kinds of things. So they're not going blind into anything. I think the youth to youth approach includes the previous youth that were part of the council.
Thanks. That's great. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that question, for that answer. Senator Bury. You can go ahead and, okay. Yeah.
Hey, okay, hello everyone. I first want to say, can you hear me? Yes, thank you to Senator Moodie for extending this invitation. And I want to thank all the groups who are going to present and those who have presented. Thank you for sharing your ideas, your voices. They mean a lot to us as senators. And so first of all, I'd like to commend you for all the work that you are doing. Now, as a senator, what do you think senators could do to elevate your voices and to bring these issues to the national forefront? And going further, I would want to know your thoughts on sort of a national resource mapping registry, because so many of these ideas and actual solutions are so very interesting and would really port to other communities. And how could we help with funding? I know that's a mouthful, so please feel free to answer as much as you want to or as little as you can. Okay.
Brian, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Senator Bury. So as it relates to what senators can do, honestly, I would hope that you guys have some ideas on that. Truly, I'm not quite peripheral when it comes to politics, and so from that perspective, I can't even fathom, what senators can and cannot accomplish just because of a lack of familiarity. So that's where I think some guidance could be really helpful. Even if it's just outlining parameters of operation, of authority, just to help give some perspective as to what can hypothetically be accomplished if we know all the options available in front of us. As it relates to creating like a national repository for services, I mean, that's actually a fantastic idea, right? where you can go on and maybe even there's menus or something that's specific to your particular situation, your demographic background, what have you, and then we can. This definitely the technology exists, of course, to have a database that can be regularly updated and easily used to access information pertinent to your particular situation. Could be different support groups, different funding avenues, different actual service providers. Those kinds of things could be extremely helpful to have, like on a national compiled basis, analogous, say, to, for example, the business, the business directory that the federal government has, except perhaps way more user friendly, because that one is quite a conglomerate that needs needs a facelift for sure. But that's when it comes to funding as well. Obviously, that there would need to be something of that scale, national in size, would require funding. So that would be huge as well. Just in terms of where funding could potentially be generated for that. I think once this actually picks up steam, it would not be difficult to actually get something like a resource repository created and maintained and publicly, even privately funded, potentially, just because it's so important to have. I mean, I always say that your decisions are only as informed as you are, right? So when you have all this information in front of you, it becomes you can make better decisions as a parent or as somebody who is interacting with children and youth, a service provider or what have you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a very big question for what senators can do for youth across Canada. But just speaking from my personal experience, I think staying up to date with the issues that youth are going through is really important. Like being on the ground and talking to youth, because it changes a lot faster than you'd think. Helping youth with those things that they don't know a lot about, like Brian was saying, not everyone's aware like how government works, what senators actually do. So I think doing those tasks and educating youth about what they're going into, because I've been in meetings with like politicians where the youth are kind of asking them all these things and the politician will just say like, that's not my job, like that's a different jurisdiction or something like that, but not really direct youth in the right direction. So I guess being level with them, help with funding, of course, and then national network. I think RMYC was working with Youth Centers Canada as a network to connect youth centers across Canada. Haran, who's in the meeting, and myself both worked on reaching out to different youth groups. We had a lot of trouble because a lot of them stopped running during COVID. So I guess keeping up with who's active and who's still participating and running things is pretty difficult during COVID times, but that would be really important to continue working on that as we have been.
Thank you so much. Senator Mivier Deschênes, vous avez une question. The floor is yours.
We have translation. I can speak French.
Yes.
Je voulais juste répondre peut-être à la dernière observation qui a été faite sur le rôle des sénateurs. Je comprends tout à fait votre frustration à l'effet que des membres du Parlement vous disent bon, mais c'est pas tout à fait ce sur quoi je travaille, il y a des problèmes de juridiction. Moi, je vous dirais que ma porte est ouverte pour entendre et écouter les jeunes. Les sénateurs n'ont pas de budget pour financer les initiatives extérieures. Du côté les députés, ils ont un petit budget discrétionnaire qu'ils peuvent parfois accorder à certains projets. De notre côté, on a un budget pour notre bureau, pour financer notre bureau, mais pas de budget pour l'extérieur. Alors, c'est un obstacle. Ce qui ne veut pas dire que nous ne voulons pas entendre la voix des jeunes, parce que par définition, nous sommes vieux. Les sénateurs sont choisis quand ils ont un certain âge en général. Et donc, à cause de cela, on a un décalage forcément avec ce que vous pensez, ce que vous voulez et tout. Donc, la seule façon de combler ce fossé, c'est de vous entendre, de vous écouter. Je donne toujours cet exemple parce qu'une de nos collègues, Marie-Lou McFedrin, a mis sur pied un conseil des jeunes où elle a assez systématiquement des échanges avec son conseil des jeunes quand elle veut comprendre si ce qu'elle propose a un écho chez les jeunes. Donc, ça dépend des membres du Parlement, ça dépend de beaucoup de choses, mais une de nos tâches comme parlementaires, c'est d'écouter les citoyens et les groupes. Voilà, c'est tout ce que je voulais ajouter au débat.
Merci beaucoup. Thanks so much. So, Senator Odette, if you have your headset, that'd be really helpful for interpretation. Okay. Maybe, do you have it right? Okay. While you set up, then, Senator Moodie, if you'd like to ask your question, and then...
I would. Thank you, Josh. So thank you to all the young folks that have contributed so far. These are really instructive perspectives that you bring to the table. And I think that we want to know something from you about how you can help us. So we're looking at, do we need a national strategy? And thank you, Brian, for committing to that and putting your vote there. But I want to know how you see your group participating in creating and establishing such a national strategy. What role should you be playing? And where would you like to see yourself participating? Is it at the ground level? Is it when we're forming ideas around shaping ideas around what should be included in it? Should you be helping us when we start to encounter those jurisdictional problems that your colleague Cameron mentioned before? And we know we're going to meet those. So help us understand how you can contribute to this process.
Certainly, an excellent question, Senator Moodie. So one of the reservations that we actually had as a council when it came to attending this particular discussion, this forum, is that none of us are formally trained as it relates to caring for children. Formally, in the sense that none of us have for example, a background in social work or even I think early childhood education, anything like that. However, a number of us are parents, so we do have that very learned perspective. And therefore, I think we definitely can share our perspectives from that lens as it relates to children and youth. But for the National Inuit Youth Council in general, what we can bring to this, of course, is the contemporary concerns and challenges that are affecting children and youth in Inuit communities across Canada. In fact, that is the prime intent of the National Youth Council, is to advocate on such issues on exactly this sort of platform. So when it comes to that perspective, it's to make sure that our unique challenges that just are due to remoteness and the exorbitant cost of living and therefore the how hard it is to get materials, food, short shipping windows create a very challenging set of circumstances that are atypical when compared and juxtaposed across the conditions facing communities across Canada as a whole. So we can provide very clear, very modern challenges, issues, and paths forward, suggestions, as to well, first and foremost, lay the groundwork of the modern circumstances, and then we can, of course, as well lend our voice to how we perceive solutions that we perceive that are realistic, attainable, and potentially as well as offer like a stopgap measure to, for example, curtail the loss of future Inuit leaders to suicide, for example, which it's a real tragedy, and perhaps even a disservice by all levels of government that to be Inuk today's society is to be intimately familiar with losing a loved one to suicide. Myself having lost my brother, my younger brother. And I wish I could say that this was statistical anomaly, but it truly isn't. When the suicide rates are up to 10 times higher, and it's even higher than that. Some other communities compared to the Canadian average per capita. And when a community of a couple hundred, a couple thousand, even for some of the bigger ones, when we lose a youth, when we lose a child, to such a permanent end, to potentially temporary problems, temporary pain, it affects everybody, and it can even lead to bizarre chains of young people taking their lives as a result. So it seems to snowball, and there are many ways to I think remind youth, and this goes beyond, of course, even Inuit communities, but Inuit communities need it especially so. Just for example, working with this kind of framework on how to best serve Inuit youth and the issues we face, and there are many relatively even straightforward ways to at least start. I think just making sure that the challenges facing contemporary Inuit youth and children identified and at least somewhat mitigated. And this sort of strategy could really do a good job at highlighting these things. For example, when it comes to Inuit Nunangat, we of course have the Inuit Tapiri Kanatami, the national liaison between Inuit and federal government. They've released their national Inuit suicide prevention strategy back in, I believe it was maybe 2016, something to that effect. But that's just the start. This could advance further the plight of Inuit children and youth in our communities.
Thank you. Cameron, any thoughts? Any additional thoughts?
I think RMYC's role in a national strategy would be unique because of the youth-led nature. So it'd probably be a lot of input and gathering information on the ground that they could do. We have really great connections to remote northern communities through the peer mentor program, like the DFC peer mentoring program, where you hear different perspectives from the youth that you wouldn't regularly because of that youth-to-youth approach. They're more comfortable to say what's really going on. So that could be a unique way to help with the national strategy.
Thank you both. I think Senator Odette has a question.
Easy.
First, I want to start with a comment. Thank you very much, Senatrice Moodie, and my colleague Brian Francis, and many other people that work so hard and still working with passion and love. We used to be young, now we're grandmothers and grandfather, but also we care, and I care about any message that we can hear that comes from different places. So thank you. Thank you. We hear from the north, we hear from different places. And at the end of the day, the senators were human beings. But when we start the day, also, we're human beings. And I don't pretend that I know everything because I'm half Innu from the Innu Nation and Québécoise. But I believe that when the open mind, open spirit is at the rendezvous, it helped me to be better as a senator and to remind myself that a year and a half ago, I didn't know what it was to be a senator. So it's a learning journey, but I can see the power in a good way, of how we can influence. But your message, Brian, if I see your name, I'm blind. It's so small, the letters. The message that I could help you if I knew what you can do, it put us in a position also that the national strategy, there's a education populaire very important that people can understand that, or understand that what we can do to support this, or to walk beside the youth no matter where they live. And we are parents, we are grandparents, and I'm from a world where for too long with the Indian Act, we're all the same Indian with bands and numbers. I don't know for your people, Brian and the Métis, but it is clear for me that there's a beautiful diversity and a powerful one across Canada. We call it Canada. And when we come with national strategy or action plan, I hope that the spirit from many nations can resonate, that will bring the differences or the uniqueness inside that big Chappatuan. So I don't know how you thought, or what was your message, or what is your message today, to make sure that, yes, it is national, but we don't forget the uniqueness or the beauty of our nations across Canada. What would you would recommend to us, or to this national strategy, to make sure it's there? And it's for any nation, not only Indigenous people. That's my thought.
Absolutely. I'll just go first. I went first last time. I don't know if you want to go first, Cameron. Feel free to raise your hand if so. So I actually mentioned that when I gave my opening kind of presentation, I suppose, about how any such strategy that respects Canada as a whole, as a nation, necessarily needs to have equitable representation of the unique challenges facing the different ethnic groups, say across the nation, because there is truly a uniqueness. Which is one of the things I really love about Canada, is just how awesome and how interesting it makes Canada as a whole, and just making sure there's equitable, and I would say, equitable, not equal, because it's not inherently it's an asymmetric situation. And therefore we need equitable accountability for any such strategy as it relates to more marginalized demographics across Canada. So this is just making it equitable, right? Making sure that there's I guess a stab at fairness, given the diversity that we encounter across Canada.
Yeah, I think RMIC Moffat, our director, often talks about how it's kind of a small scale representation of multiculturalism, because we have so many different cultural groups working together, and then we can go forward into our careers and education with that experience of working with multiple different cultures. But he tells this story about when he started the Multicultural Youth Council. A lot of First Nations communities weren't impressed, because you're talking about how a group like this was focusing on newcomers and not focusing on the people in our own home who are like struggling. So Moffat took that to heart and started working more with First Nations students and youth. And I think what Brian was talking about, being equitable and not exactly equal. It's like the people who need that support get that support. It's definitely something that works within our small scale organization in Thunder Bay, working with like the DFC ambassadors and working closely with DFC, as well as welcoming newcomers and working with Muslim students and students from different countries that are coming in, and students from Thunder Bay who have a long history in Thunder Bay, all these different people, but making sure that the voices that need to be heard are heard. And I think if it works on this small scale, it can work in other places too.
Fantastic. We have time for maybe one more quick question. And if there are no questions, we're going to take a break now. We'll